Hello, everyone. Again, this is Q&A with A&V. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and joining me is the inimitable Amy Rosenfeld. Welcome.
Hello, Vincent.
You know what inimitable is?
Why don't you tell everybody? And why don't you tell people what it means, since it's your word?
I don't know actually what it means. Inimitable, as impossible to copy.
Yes, I am definitely unique. I don't think we need Howard Stern. That's for sure.
Let's get that one up here. Aqueous solubility. Good name. Would you ever consider going on Howard Stern?
You can go on Howard Stern.
Oh, you would. You'd be better at countering him, not me.
No, I don't know.
I have one for you here.
It's hard. I can't believe he's actually still on like some broadcast network. That's crazy.
He's on satellite radio. He makes a lot of money too.
And
Amy, have you ever heard of the exosome theory that viruses get out of cells? That viruses are exosomes with protein and DNA RNA that are produced by cells and tissues. Do you think a virus particle is an exosome, Amy?
No, I think an exosome is more specific. I think it's more specific. I mean, yeah, you could call some viral particles exosomes, I guess, but I wouldn't.
Do exosomes have plasma membrane proteins like viruses do?
Of course, they're derived from the plasma membrane. They just pop off.
But they have a variety of proteins, whereas a viral membrane has mainly a spike. It may have some other proteins in minority,
That's
but
not,
right? Mainly.
No, that's not true.
There's a ton of. Can I finish, please?
Okay.
Let me finish. The majority of viral proteins in a viral membrane are viral derived. There are cell proteins for sure, but you focus viral glycoproteins to the sites of budding. So I think that's one way they're different from exosomes. Don't make faces, Amy. Just say yes or no.
Well, you can't use viral proteins in the definition if you're talking. You can't use virus in the definition. So I don't know what you're talking about. But that's not what I would have. But that's not what I would have used as the example or the explanation. But that's fine, because the reality of it is that HIV has very little viral protein on the surface. It's mostly cell proteins.
But
so
flu is packed with flu glycoproteins.
Yeah, but that's not everyone. But so in theory, yes, it's a cell membrane. It's a cell membrane derived vesicle. It could be an exosome, but we don't refer to it as that way. And exosomes usually are chronically blubbing indiscriminately, whereas there's late domains and other stuff to help egress or release viral particles.
If you add exosomes to cells, will they get in and reprogram the cell to make more exosomes?
Some will do, yeah. Some will do. That's the whole point of the exosome theory of cancer, is that those exosomes from transformed cells contain, some kind of microRNA or whatever, and then they fuse to normal cells and they facilitate transformation of the next cell.
So are exosomes spread from person to person via respiratory droplets?
I don't know. I don't think it's ever been looked at.
Oh, okay.
But I wouldn't have made the analogy, and I wouldn't have used that definition.
Could a sensitive fluorescent or light activated probe be made to detect the virus on surfaces to test masks, door handles, etc.?
Vincent, isn't that what didn't you have David Brenner? Didn't he talk about formite?
No, he was inactivating these. They want to know if there's residual virus.
I'm sure you could do that.
Yeah, you probably could, but it would have to be very sensitive, right? And non-toxic. I don't know of anyone who's doing it, but yeah, it should be possible.
Yeah.
Hey, look, we have someone from Palestine. Can you believe it?
That's cool.
Very good.
It's very cool.
Oh, now here's one for the neurovirologist, Amy. Is there any risk of lipid nanoparticles from the Moderna vaccine crossing the blood-brain barrier? Do they enter systemic circulation?
They enter the lymph that goes directly into the draining lymph node. if they're not immediately absorbed or taken up by the cell that you're harpooning them into. And I don't know why it would be a Moderna vaccine only problem. It would be a Pfizer or any vaccine.
Sure.
So any lipid nanoparticle.
I
Plus,
think,
I'm not sure what size they are in order to cross the blood-brain barrier. I don't know if they're a uniform size or if they're different or if they're various sizes, and then they might not cross the blood-brain barrier. They might be too big.
We have somebody from Kentucky, and Frank wants to know how you're feeling after your first shot.
My left arm was very sore for a week, and I had a bruise where they harpoon you.
Why do you call it harpooning?
Because they jab the needle into you. It's like harpooning a whale. Psh.
But now you're okay?
Yeah, no, I'm fine.
And when is your booster? Do you know? Have you
January.
scheduled?
Yeah, of course. Before you leave, they make you schedule. January 19th. Everybody, Ian, Lukendra, everybody, Eliza, we're all going.
So, hi, professors. There's two professors here, me and Amy. We're both professors. Why are PCR tests run with a CT up to 40? That's a good question. Amy, in the lab, when you run a PCR, you always just do 40 cycles, don't you?
Yeah, but that's because I want to visualize it. I'm not doing fluorescence by a detector. I'm using my eyeballs and the amount of thidium bromide that fluoresces on the background of a gel. Traditionally, it's done. You did RT PCRs up to 40 cycles to get a band, and so that's what they did. But when they first started, they didn't know where it would start to. You have to do dose titration, so they didn't know that. That's why it's generally done to 40 cycles. That's just the tradition.
Hello, Samantha in Brooklyn. It's her new favorite pastime. Good.
Great.
Nick wants to know if you could be infected by just one SARS-CoV-2 variant.
Your dose paper does not suggest that.
The ferret paper?
Ferret and Barrett's mouse model does not suggest that.
The one I remember, the ferrets, if you put 200 PFU in their nose, they barely got infected. So I think if you put one virus particle in someone's nose, no, you'd never get infected.
Probably not.
How were Fauci and Gates able to predict this pandemic? Amy, do you agree that they predicted the pandemic?
Did they predict the pandemic? Well, on a TED Talk, Gates is known as highlighting viral pandemic and pointing out a coronavirus, but that was in 2017. So that was after SARS and the MERS outbreak. And I guess on your TWIV with Fauci initially, when you and Condit went to the NIH, he talks about a viral outbreak, but I think he thought it was going to be influenza, right?
Yeah, we asked him what keeps him awake at night. He says the next outbreak, if we're ready for it,
Right. Well, we weren't.
I mean, if you predict that this is going to be a big outbreak in, say, February, you had a half chance of being right and half chance of being wrong. So,
no, Gates came out in 2017. It's a TED Talk. Andrew sent it to me and said, wow, he was very impressed that he pulled out coronavirus because he saw that MERS and SARS had come every 10 years. And so he said, we're not ready for a coronavirus pandemic. We need to get it together.
But if you had asked me or Amy, we would have said the same thing, right?
That we're not ready for a pandemic? Yeah.
Especially a corona one, yeah.
Well, any viral pandemic, it doesn't matter corona or not. I would have said we're not ready. And then I would have said our pandemic plan is too heavily focused on the pathogen. Yeah. Go back and reassess.
So Salim wants to know how does a spike get on the surface and becomes an antigen-presenting cell?
Well, the spike is not an antigen-presenting cell. The cell producing the spike is an antigen-presenting cell. So the spike RNA, the mRNA gets introduced into the cell, gets released. It gets engaged by the ribosome. The ribosomes begins protein synthesis, translation of the mRNA into protein, has a signal to send it to the ER, goes to the ER, it becomes an ER luminant protein, then it goes through the proper pathway to become a cell, a surface protein.
So
Then it gets in some cases it gets digested and presented on MHC.
Yeah, so can be displayed on a muscle cell in its entirety, and then it's recognized as foreign. Or it can be the liposome, the nanoparticle, can be taken up by an antigen-presenting cell, like a dendritic cell or macrophage. The protein's made, it's processed and displayed on MHC on the surface, and then a T cell comes along and says, this is foreign. Let's start making a response. That's how it works. Okay, sugar. Pfizer is still collecting data. Yes, Pfizer and Moderna will be collecting phase 3 data for 2 years, right, Amy? 2 years?
Everybody's collecting data for 2 years after their
I haven't seen any of them
EUA.
yet.
Well, it's not a new time point. They did the original time point. The first time point was 7 or 14 days out. And then when they hit 90 cases in the vaccine group who got disease, and then I don't know what the next time point is, probably 6 months or something. I'm sure you can find it on the FDA website.
But J&J is going to report phase 3 by the end of this month, supposedly, with their vaccine.
They're just reporting the first time point. They're not reporting.
It's phase 3 data, right? It's called phase 3 data, right?
Whatever.
Stella
makes
wants
it sound
to know,
like the way you phrased it makes it sound like the trial is over. And it's
Only to
one
you.
time point.
Only to you.
No, to everybody.
No.
Okay, whatever.
I said they're reporting phase 3 data. I didn't say the trial was over.
But that implies that it's over.
No,
you should
it
be
doesn't
more
imply.
specific. Whatever.
What are the characteristics you'd expect from a lab-designed virus? And how does SARS-CoV-2 compare? For the sake of convincing people it wasn't made in a lab, LOL. I would say, this is my opinion. I'm going to let Amy give hers. She won't like what I say, but my opinion is if it were made in a lab, it would probably resemble a virus from bats. So resemble meaning nearly identical, because they would get a virus from a bat and manipulate it a little and it would get out. Whereas the virus we have is quite distant from the closest known virus from a bat. It still has over 1,200 nucleotide changes compared to RATG13, which is the closest bat SARS-like coronavirus. So I would think it would be very close to one of those, but that's just speculating. What do you think, Amy?
I think that explanation lacks creativity.
What would you like to do?
Well, first of all, I would never do it because I don't ever think that we can outsmart Mother Nature. So I think to suggest that we've outsmarted Mother Nature is like one of the stupidest things I've ever heard of. But I would not have it look anything like the bat virus. I would have pieced it together from various components from SARS and MERS and other coronas, throw in some other stuff, optimize. Never have a furin cleavage site, optimize it really to interact with, a more ubiquitous protein than ACE2. You can figure it out. But I would never think that we could outsmart Mother Nature. So
well, no,
it's not something I would ever do.
I agree with you, but they just wanted to know what it would look like.
Well, it could look like a gazillion different things. It could be part like MHV that, infects the liver and infects the brain of mice. Could be part SARS. Could be part MERS that, and lead to 30% lethality or whatever MERS is. It's like really high, right?
Yeah, 37%. Yeah.
Yeah. So why would I have it look like a bat virus when I have something that we know that is like 30% lethal?
Someone's asking if there's a video feed. Yes, there is. I just checked.
I did not know that they were concerned.
One person, why do we need to be vaccinated if the survival rate is 99.97%?
Okay, so we don't care about the people who get severe disease and stuff and this constant spreading?
Yeah, a lot of people dying. I mean, we have 7
I don't know
people.
that. I don't know where he calculated the survival rate is 99.9%, because I think if you take the total number of people infected and divided it by the number of people that are dead, that tells you the survival rate, or even subtract that, and that tells you and take based off the people who didn't die, that percentage out of who got infected, I don't think that is 99.9%. And no, I'm not mad today. Why do people always assume I'm mad? And I like it. I'm abrasive.
It's yeah, if you divide the global deaths, 2 million divided by 92 million cases, you get 2% fatality.
So
but
that's not 99% survival rate. That's 98% survival rate. And 2% case fatality is what is flu per year? About 1%? 0.1%. We have a vaccine against it.
Yesterday, 4,000 people died in the U.S. every day, 4,000 people. So that's a lot. That's why we want a vaccine. Is it worth the side effects? Several people have been injured or killed for the injection. No, they have not been injured or killed from the injection. These are people who have been killed in car accidents, heart attacks, all unrelated to the vaccine. Questella loves the 21 virology course. Great, and so does Max. That's great. Thank you. Anthony wants to know if there's any concern with a household that has one individual getting the vaccine and the rest not having. Others at risk.
Of course, others are at risk. It was a big controversy about what to do for essential workers whose partners were not essential workers.
Yeah, it is a concern, yeah. What happens when you having antibodies after being infected, constantly meeting the virus again? What happens with the antibodies? Are they getting reproduced, reactivated? Yeah, if you're first infected and recover, you have a memory of the viral antigens. And so when you get infected again, that memory kicks in, you make a lot of antibodies and lymphocytes, antiviral. So, yeah, that's the feature of the immune system. The second time, you have a more rapid response so that it prevents disease. This is a good question. What demographics are driving the pandemic?
Right now?
Yeah. No more old people like it was previously, right?
It hasn't been old people since the beginning of the spring.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's old people in the beginning. Now it's not.
Right. It's the 18 to 35-year-olds who don't stay home and who go out drinking and don't wear their masks, and the people who think that they're invincible.
A lot of college kids as well, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And people who go to bars and so forth. I mean, the reason we have a big spike right now is after Thanksgiving and the holidays, people got together without adequate protection. They did their usual thing, and kids came home from college and so forth, and that's what's driving it.
Yeah, I mean, actually, so someone who I'm related to, her ex-husband's brother and sister-in-law had a Christmas party, and the brother-in-law was feeling ill, did not get tested, did not wear a mask, had his whole family, including his mother and his, I think his wife's father-in-law over. They were older, they got infected, and within a week they were dead. How would you like to live with that? Knowing that you killed your mother because you didn't wear a mask and you didn't physically distance and just, say, okay, well, Christmas comes every year. We can celebrate it in April when we can go outside or whatever. I mean, I don't know. I couldn't live with that.
Oregon's lost power. Angela wants to know, how long do you have to wait to get a negative test after being positive?
Depends.
Can I show Daniel's graph? Or you don't
No.
like it?
No, because it's irrelevant. I mean, Ian was positive and had a negative test like 2 weeks later. And Nisha was positive and and didn't have a negative test for 7.5 weeks.
Yeah, so it depends.
And it had nothing to do with it.
The CT value is the key, whether it is low or high. If you are out 7 weeks and you have a CT of 40, you're not transmissible. How long do you have to wait to get the vaccine after having been infected?
Wait a minute. But Ian and Nisha, when they're first diagnosed, they both had a CT value of 11.
I understand. Yes.
So it had nothing to do with the CT value.
I know their results
So I
didn't.
don't know.
I'm explaining this in the
I don't understand, but it
I'm,
doesn't matter.
I'm explaining this in the context of a CT value.
Right. And the CT value of the beginning infection had nothing to do with how long it took for you to become negative. Because Ian and Niche were basically 11 at the beginning of their infection. Ian was negative like 2.5 weeks later, and Niche was negative 7.5 weeks later. They started at the same point. For whatever reason, the RNA persisted much longer in Niche than Ian. I have no idea why. Do you?
Nope, I don't.
Okay.
It depends. It's variable. But if you want an average, just PCR positive negative, it's not the way to go. That's my point. Because you can have RNA for a long time but not be transmissible. I think you have to look at the transmissibility, which is a CT of 34 and higher. How long do you have to wait to get the vaccine after having been infected? I would say you have to have recovered about a month to let your germinal centers get established. And then the vaccine acts as a boost.
I think Ian and Danielle are saying 2 months.
2 months? Not,
So.
Amy would say, what's 1 or 2 months? Bangalore, India. Hello, good morning. I guess it's morning there. Why are PCRs being run up to 40 cycles? Oh, we just answered that, actually, Nash. Sorry. A few minutes ago. What's the deal with South African variation? Amy, you know anything about what's going on there?
Well, the polymerase made some mistakes. It had a few nucleotides that were put in the wrong spot. And some of them resulted in amino acid changes. Some of them don't. And what it means, not really clear.
Yeah, it's 23 changes, something like that. A lot of changes, but we don't know what they mean. Some people think they make the virus more transmissible, but Amy and I and others are not convinced. What do you think of, hey, Zurich. Hello, Zurich. I might be in Zurich in October, if not next spring. 2 a.m. in the morning, pouring cold. What do you think of mixing vaccines? Not a good idea because they haven't been tried as mixtures. You know, when you want to mix drugs, you have to do a trial. So until you do a trial of this, not a good idea. Kids under 16, nobody's talking much about this. Isn't COVID going to run wild across this population, despite adults starting to be vaccinated? Yeah, the under 18 are not going to be vaccinated, right, Amy?
Not that I'm aware of, because they were not included in the trials. Although Moderna says it's doing a child trial now, but they don't expect to be ready with any results till 2022. I think that everybody has fallen into the idea that because they don't get symptoms or they don't get it, the majority of them don't develop as severe symptoms or not infected, which was the wrong interpretation of the data. But so I don't think that there was a tremendous concern about children under 16 getting severe disease, although we've now know that is not correct, right? Because you had the multi-system failure that looks like Kawasaki disease or whatever it is.
Kawasaki, yeah.
Kawasaki disease, right? And that all occurred in children.
Yeah. I mean, I still think you're right. It's more rare in kids, but it's not zero for sure.
No, symptoms might be more rare, but you don't know about infection because they're not tested.
I don't mean
as
infection.
much.
I'm talking about symptoms. Serious COVID
right.
is more rare in kids, and that's the only thing. I mean, I think in the future they should trial the vaccines in younger kids. I don't see there's any reason not to.
Well, they are. Moderna is doing a trial, as I said.
But let's say you have a household with 4 vaccinated adults and 2 kids. I guess it's not a problem because the kids won't get serious disease likely. That's the thing.
Well, that's a likely, right? Are you willing to take that chance? Because what was it? Like 5 to 7% of children who got infected did develop this multi-system failure disease over the summer. You heard about like 100
So
kids
what's the
here
solution,
and that.
Amy?
Well, the solution is not to say that kids don't get infected when you haven't, when it's clear that every respiratory disease, some child gets infected and comes home with their snotty nose and gives it to the parents. Like, why would you start off with this idea that they're not infected because they didn't present with symptoms? That's ridiculous.
I don't think I said they were not infected.
Well, I didn't say that you did. I'm just saying that that was the beginning of the way that the pandemic started off with. That's why they were not included, is because they were assumed not to have disease because they didn't present symptoms.
Daryl wants to know if we have any tips for designing robot-assisted tech with BARDA. I don't know, but I know someone who was in BARDA. I could put you in touch with them, Daryl, if you'd like. So if you shoot me an email, I can do that. Unless Amy knows. Do you know?
I don't have any idea.
Does TCL immunity wane with time post-infection vaccination? Sure, I believe it does. The studies of Shane Crotty and Alessandro Setti show that it wanes, but they think it's going to last years, even though it's waning. Waning doesn't mean zero; it just means going down.
Yeah, but I didn't know it was going down that significantly.
Right. Today, this Big Tails Fishing waived his second booster, so all 65. California today waived the second booster, so all 65 and older can get the first vaccine. That's interesting. But eventually, everybody will get a booster anyway, right?
Yes, I would never have made it an announcement with we're waiving the second booster.
Yeah, I think
because that sounds
right.
like you don't need to come and get it.
Yes.
I mean, people needed to see. This was the problem when you wrote our editorial saying we should just go with one shot. See, that has a different connotation than saying, when you to boost, you don't. Everybody should get vaccinated, and a boost can be done at various time points post the initial vaccine. And we've made it so that you come back 21 and 28 days so that you don't forget to come back. And we can actually prolong that a little bit longer so that we can booster everybody while we're ramping up manufacturing, right? That's basically what we should have said. Instead, we came out and said some ridiculous other crap that then confuses everybody and says, oh, well, then you get emails of we only need one shot. And that's not really correct. I mean, people don't recognize the real reason why children got polio and DPT at 2, 4, and 6 months old wasn't because that's when it's been shown that that's when the boost should come. It's because the kids go for well baby checkups to make sure that the soft spot in their head is healing and the hole in the heart is healing and they're developing normally. And you're already going, so why not just give you the booster so the parents don't have to keep coming back? I mean, This isn't rocket science.
Ryan wants to know, why do different PCR targets have different CT thresholds for positivity?
Because the oligos anneal with different efficiencies and at different melting temperatures and different curves. Not every oligo has the same sequence. And it depends on a lot of other stuff. So what the salt concentration is, how much template you have, if it's hidden or not, how high GC content, yada, yada, yada.
Moderna says their vaccine's protection will last at least a year. Would you expect the same from Pfizer's vaccine? I would.
Sure.
It's very similar in its makeup.
Well, the truth of the matter is once you make a spike antibody, what difference does it make how you made it?
That's right. Hello from Ireland. All right, Fern wants to know how to get vaccinated. Well, depends what state you are in. New York and New Jersey are announcing now 65 and older, right, Amy?
Yeah, I think so.
And so other states may be, so just go to the state's public health website and check it out. Maybe Amy would get this one. If you have your thymus removed as an adult, are you immunocompromised?
No, actually, my mom and Jonathan have all had, and a cousin of mine have all had their thymus removed. And they are not considered immune compromised. And plus it involutes as you get older.
That's right. And you start to make less new memory T cells as a consequence, right?
Right. And
Like me.
even so, but even so, like my mom, traditionally, like up until I think the 60s, they automatically took out your tonsils. They had no idea what they were doing. So they just went and took them out.
That's right.
And nobody who has had a tonsillectomy is considered immune compromised.
Yeah, it's just two miserable tonsils. You still got lots of other lymph nodes, and you got your spleen, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but seriously, that's what they did. They didn't have any idea. They just said,
Yes.
we could take these things out.
When I was growing up, if you got a sore throat, your tonsils were inflamed because they're fighting the infection in your throat. They'd take them out.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying.
But I still have mine.
Well, that's good. So do I.
Do you?
Uh-huh.
This is very funny. He thinks MicrobeTV says microbrew TV, as in how to brew beer at home. That's very funny.
Well, the truth of the matter is yeast is a microbe, so you could give them tips of how to make beer at home, or bread, or cheese, anything that needs yeast.
If our shows were about beer, we'd get a lot more listeners, right?
Yes.
I don't know anything about brewing beer. Is it possible for SARS-2 to form entirely new reservoirs in different mammal species? Yeah, for sure. So
well, it has, right? Minks, deer mice,
gorillas.
Deer
mice. Apparently gorillas
cats,
now, yeah.
Cats, tigers at the zoo.
Yep. All right, Amy, E484K, any concerns about this?
So I believe that this is the mutation that is thought to be not able to be neutralized. And Jesse Bloom has a lot of thoughts about this recently on Twitter. So he's very concerned about this mutation. So you guys should follow Jesse. And
does he think this knocks out polyclonal responses? Neutralization, I mean?
I think he saw it in one patient, but I didn't follow his story. So you guys can follow his story. But other variants have this alteration in the context of a lot of other alterations, like the N501Y, and that mixture still is neutralized by polyclonal serum. So maybe when it's only solely, I don't know. You have to follow.
Yeah, Jesse, I think the key here is we have to pay attention to these changes, and as they arise in different combinations, test them to see if they're still neutralized by convalescent sera or serum from people immunized or whoever recovered. And if you see a difference, then you have to worry. Maybe you think about changing the vaccine at that point. Will mRNA vaccines make people susceptible to cytokine storm when they encounter a wild coronavirus?
Why would the antibodies against SARS-CoV-2 have any effect against a wild coronavirus? They're not cross-reactive, or at least not that we have observed.
Do you mean a wild from like animals in the wild, or? I
don't know. I mean, I've kind of thought that he meant a new coronavirus, and we don't see any cross-reactivity between the 4 common cold coronaviruses and SARS antibodies or MERS antibodies or SARS-CoV-2 antibodies. And there's some iffy papers about cross-reactivity between SARS and SARS-CoV-2, so that's what I thought it meant, but I could be wrong. I'm happy if I'm wrong. It's fine.
You know anything about the Japanese variant, Amy?
I believe it is very similar to all of the other variants, but it was just reported, I think last week or earlier this week, and they are like closing down Japan. No more travel, I think. Or when you go to Japan, you have to have tested negative twice or something, or beforehand.
Is this thought to have come from Africa, or
it's new.
Different? It's different.
Well, it arose in Japan, I believe.
Okay, got it.
But they all seem to have the same a similar group of mutations. Like they all seem to have the N501Y and the E84K, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. How likely do you think that the Astrazeneca vaccine will be approved for EUA before April? I have no idea, Amy. Do you have any idea?
I don't know. I don't know
what
where
the
the
status is. I
I
don't
don't
know
know.
what the status is. I mean, it's a long time away. They had begun their
It's
phase
not
3
really that long.
and they and they stopped it. Have they resumed the phase 3 in the U.S.?
I don't know. But remember the time you said, "Oh, it's a long way away," and when I was on TWIV in October, and I said, "No, it's just 10 weeks. 10 weeks." Remember that?
Okay, it's fine. We all make mistakes, Amy.
It's fine. I just like to tease you.
Herbert wants to know if we watch Microcosmos on YouTube. No, I don't. I've heard of it though. Is it good? Okay, some of these have been answered. Here's a good one. Do you think after this pandemic there will be funding incentive to work on a universal coronavirus vaccine?
I think that's a question you should address to Plazy.
Why? You think he's going to make a universal corona vaccine?
He is making a universal flu. They've talked about, or Cromer told me, they've talked about making a universal rhino. Good luck.
I hope so. I think it would be nice, but I mean, there's certainly conserved epitopes, like in the flu HA stem. There are conserved epitopes that make broadly neutralizing antibodies. There's certainly likely to be equivalents in coronaviruses, but people are not looking at them.
No, I don't think that that's correct.
I saw a paper on them. Do you remember the paper is it published in Science where they said kids don't get SARS-CoV-2 as much because they have antibodies to common cold coronas that recognize this S2 portion of the spike, which is more conserved. You sent me that paper, Amy.
Yeah, and I think it's not correct, and I don't think it's correct.
That's a different story.
Because the thing is really you think that SARS and SARS-CoV-2, which use ACE, and MERS, which uses DPP, is going to have enough conservation?
Well, no.
To make a, okay. So right then and there is the answer.
Amy, if there are epitopes on S2, which does not bind receptor that can neutralize, that would work. There are other ways to neutralize besides blocking binding. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, yeah, but the truth of the matter is I don't believe that I believe that the paper that thought that there was cross-reactivity, that many people have come out and said that there's no cross-reactivity.
Yeah, I thought it was suspect. I was just citing it as a proof of concept.
Well, you shouldn't flow out misinformation.
Excuse me, we discussed it on TWIV with the appropriate caveats. I was very critical.
Well, you did not have the appropriate caveats here. I had to flush it out now. I don't have time to flush it out.
Why can't the FDA look into the ASIOX data that were used to get UK approval?
Those were directly from the company. They don't undergo independent review.
And they were also that was based on UK trial. The US trial had been suspended for a while. And that's the FDA needs data from the US.
Well, they have different merits or whatever, criteria.
So people are saying the death rate is 2 to 3%, which is millions and millions. Yeah, that's the point. That millions and millions is a lot. You don't want millions and millions of people to die within a year or two. Why did Moderna and Pfizer decide to make mRNA vaccines and not other more typical vaccines? So Moderna, that's what they do. They make mRNA vaccines. The company was founded, the name of the company, Mode RNA, is making RNA-based therapeutics. Then there's a company in Germany, BioNTech, that did the same thing, and Pfizer bought them or
collaborated
their mRNA vaccine as well. So that's where it came from. And Moderna's been working on it for many years with other viruses. And they said in January, let's give it a shot. They had some interesting data with the other viruses. Are the current approved or EU-approved vaccines effective against the South African variant?
Yes.
Yes, they are. I have MS on an anti-CD20 medicine that kills B cells.
Yep.
Will a vaccine work? T cells, how to test immunity. Will a vaccine work, Amy?
Yes, actually, somebody I know has what is it? What germinal something or other lymphoma, and it went through a course of the anti-CD20 antibody therapy. Now is off infusions and has been told to go get vaccinated. And before the infusions started, they got a flu vaccine.
World War I, healthy soldiers died in the trenches while the sick spread H1N1 in sick bays. You think areas of conflict are more likely to put pressure for deadlier strains to emerge?
I thought the healthy soldiers died from foot rot in the trenches.
Yeah.
And then at the end of World War I was the spike of H1N1, because 1918 is after the end of World War I.
Mm-hmm. Areas of
But
conflict.
I don't think, I do think that areas of conflict put pressure on transmission and stuff, because, they're just, war zones, and stuff happens in war zones.
All right, now this next one is made in jest, Amy. Okay?
Sure. Okay.
She's sympathizing with you.
I understand she's sympathizing. I agree that, it's kind of it's kind of obnoxious that because a female doesn't smile, she's assumed to be belligerent, aggressive, mad, displeased, blah, blah, blah. Number one. Number two, it's 8:45. I've been here since like 8 o'clock this morning, and I'm writing a grant doing experiments. I get tired. And to be honest, I don't want to listen to all these soliloquies. Just go through the bunch of questions and crank them out, and let's get to the point. I don't want to listen to.
When would you like to leave?
Well, I am splitting cells, so I have about like 7 more minutes. So
Okay.
we'll say we'll do about, I don't know, whatever 8:50 is. But you've been home all day. You had dinner. You've relaxed. I have yet to do that.
What happens to myocytes that fuse with the mRNA vaccine? Amy cursorily mentioned that the mRNA disappears after 4 days. Does the cell degrade the mRNA, or are the myocytes destroyed?
The cell degrades the mRNA. Goes through mRNA degradation pathways.
How many epitopes on the spike? I was told by Alessandro Sette that there are 20 B and T cell epitopes, right? Epitopes combined.
I don't know. When he sent you that email and you told me, he did not qualify it that they were solely on spike.
Yeah, he told me he said spike. 20 B and T. But you think that's wrong?
No, I think that that's probably correct. I didn't realize he qualified it as those were spike only. I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How important is it to find out the origin of SARS-CoV-2? So we found the origin of SARS-1, and it said, whoa, there are SARS-like coronaviruses in bats. We didn't know that. So I think we need to know where this came from to prevent future spillovers. But it's not just China. Southeast Asia has a lot of coronaviruses in bats, as Peter Daszak will tell you.
But he's not just concerned about coronaviruses. He's concerned about anything that comes that will infringe upon, like Nipah virus and hantavirus and all of that. That's why he and Ian went and did that study that we did on TWIV, that almost everybody missed the main point of, was so seduced by the tracking of the bats.
What vaccine is most likely to stop spread? mRNA, viral proteins, inactivated viral vector. Heard that HPV vaccines prevent infection. Yeah. Iceland. Hey, Iceland. I don't know if you can predict which one would most likely prevent spread. I think, could you say, Amy, which kind of vaccine would they're all, so the mRNA, proteins, vectors, they're all with spike. The inactivated virus has additional proteins in it, so I don't know if that would make a difference.
Yeah, I would think so.
Nobody knows.
But on the other hand, the Salk and Sabin inactivated and infectious attenuated didn't stop spread. They just prevented paralysis.
Yeah. Any more data on Guillain-Barré from any of the vaccines? Have not heard any. Have you, Amy?
No, I haven't.
So Caleb has his first dose today, and on the screening questionnaire is asked if I'd gotten any other vaccines in the last 2 weeks. Why do you think this is?
I'm sure that I'm sure that there's some suggestions in some vaccine histories that if you get too close together,
Might interfere.
you get some kind of problem. Yeah, interference or whatever. I just didn't want to use the word interference because Brienne used it the other week, and what she said was totally wrong. So,
how does mRNA get into feces? So you're talking about SARS-CoV-2 RNA. If it's mostly a respiratory infection,
you cough up the mucus, it gets digested, you swallow it, it gets digested, it goes through your alimentary tract, and then it gets shed.
By the way, when they tested the gorillas in San Diego, they did fecal swabs.
So that paper that I just sent you that Emmy DeWitt did with African green monkeys, they also did fecal swabs.
Why is that? Do you know?
Because I guess because it's an enteric virus in bats, you want to know if it can also be an enteric virus in non-human in humans, and so closest thing you can do is a non-human primate. Wipe the tush. Yeah. I don't know. You can ask Stacy.
Amy,
the duck tush.
What percentage of human infections have virus in feces? Do you know?
I don't know. But I think if you ask Daniel, a significant number of people talk about having diarrhea and stuff.
Yeah. Here in Ireland, they're asking nurses who are asymptomatic who had a close contact with a positive to come back to work. Maybe.
Why?
I don't know. Maybe they need nurses.
I don't know. That doesn't sound like a good plan.
As someone with a history of anaphylactic reactions to injections and therefore unable to get any of the vaccines, what's the future for me and those in the same situation? So you can't get any vaccine. So you can, if you get infected, they will treat you with monoclonals, yeah, so that they will prevent you from getting very sick. Do I think the Astrazeneca vaccine is worth pursuing, despite its shortcomings? Well, the 12-week gap doesn't matter, as Amy will tell you, right?
Yeah, the 12-week gap is nothing. It's ridiculous.
And,
as I said,
I just don't know what the real numbers are with that, because they did some people with half full dose, many people with full, and they got a less efficacy with the full dose.
I think it's much simpler than that.
What?
Look, you're not going to be able to manufacture as much mRNA vaccine at Pfizer or Moderna as the world needs. You need to have alternatives. Some of them, unfortunately, some of the alternatives are not as good as what you would like them to be, but they are better than nothing. So I'm not really all that concerned about all this other crap, because it just comes down to the logistics. Would you rather get nothing or get a vaccine that can give you some protection?
Crossing the blood-brain barrier has little to do with size.
Yeah, that is true. I misspoke when I said that.
Why is the Oxford vaccine using DNA and the others RNA? The Oxford vaccine uses an adenovirus vector. It's an infectious virus particle. It's not DNA alone. But that virus has DNA as its genetic material, so that's why it has DNA in it. And you recommend a neurologist who's researching post-COVID parosmia. And they should contact Ian Lipkin, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's actually he was trained as a neurologist, right? He's an MD, although he doesn't practice medicine, but he can guide you because he's studying post-COVID.
Or they can ask Daniel.
Why do some scientists, yes, Daniel Griffin, believe that prolonging time between first and second vaccine doses increases the probability of escape mutants emerging? Want to crack that, Amy?
No, you can go first.
I think the idea is that when you have one dose, you have lower antibody titers, and they decline. And then when you have suboptimal antibody titers, you may not fully neutralize virus, and you could select for escape mutants. What do you think?
Sounds reasonable. I'm not sure that that's, you could argue the other way, right? That if you get the second dose, you'd enhance escape mutants because you're enhancing the immune pressure on the virus to escape, right?
Yeah.
So you can make the argument both ways.
All right. Do you want to take one more?
Sure.
Would you expect seniors to experience more serious disease after the vaccine compared to younger people?
More serious disease from what? The vaccine itself or from infection?
I don't know, but I would assume infection. And I don't see why you would assume that, right?
Right.
I would say no.
If anything, you should get less serious disease because your argument has always been if you get reinfected, you have an immune response, so you develop less serious disease because you're able to quell it much more efficiently.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
Isn't that the theory?
Yeah.
All right. My A549s are ready to be divided.
Thank you, Amy. Good night.
Good night. I'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah, I'll be in.
Oh, yeah. We need to change CO2, change liquid nitrogen, put the sonicator together, work on the grant.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Good night.
Bye.
Okay. VR alone. It's me. Following up on the question about risk to unvaccinated remainder of the family. Family shouldn't face more risk of infection. No. So the problem is the vaccinated people may still be able to transmit. And so if you're lax about distancing and masking and all that, that could be a problem. Watch the first 2020 lesson. That's last year. You know there's a new 2021 now. Some Twiv, will you show us the virus models? Sure. I have some here. I can show you those. And I have some in my office as well, which are very cool. This must be hard to do. What, do a live stream? I'm just answering questions. I do this in my lectures with students. So I have office hours. I just had them yesterday. And I sit on Zoom and everyone's out there asking questions. The only difference is I can see them because on Zoom you can see everyone. So I've been doing this all my career. I'm not a comedian, right? So, but if you're interested in knowledge, right? So if antibodies get reactivated constantly after meeting the virus, maybe those who have antibodies after being sick have to go out without masks to be open to the reactivation. Well, you don't need to be. Once you have the 2 boosts, you're all set. You have your memory established, so you don't need infections to boost the memory. So you don't need to do that. And memory lasts in the absence of subsequent infections. All right, so Mindful Munchkin, what do you mean by a wild coronavirus? I don't know. You're just talking about a virus out there from bats or some other animal? So, these variants are being found in different U.S. states. California, Colorado, Florida, New York, now Ohio. And in some states, it appears that they have been there for a while. I'm not concerned about them unless they lead to escape from neutralizing serum. And so far, we haven't seen that, but we need to keep an eye out for that. I'm not worried about increased transmissibility because if you do the same things you're supposed to do, masking, distancing, etc., it will take care of that. Journal Gut reported microscopic organisms in our intestines may influence the severity and our body's immune response. Yes, so the gut microbiome definitely influences our immune responses. And so this is not surprising whatsoever. However, the mechanism needs to be sorted out and whether we can use it or not in some beneficial way, right? We can say, oh, you should have these bacteria because we all have slightly different gut microbiomes, which is influenced by the people we live with and our environment and so forth. And if we could take a pill with the right microbiome that would make you have less severe COVID, that would be great, but we're a ways from being able to do that. Why is there so much emphasis on CT when how the test is administered can drastically modulate it? So, yeah, that's right, but not from 37 to 20, okay? It's going to be around 37 depending on the lab and how they're doing the test. So the concern, there are two concerns about, or considerations about CT. The first is, if it's 34 or higher, you're not transmissible. There's no need to quarantine you for 2 weeks. So we should have that number. And exactly what it is, if you set it at 34, you'd be fine, I think. The other is, a number of studies have shown that on admission, the CT, the lower the CT, the poorer your prognosis is. You're more likely to die with a lower CT, which means more RNA in your nasopharyngeal wash. And in one study I looked at, they said 22 is roughly the cutoff. So there it's a little harder because that could vary, right? You can't just say 22. So you have to have a range. And it has to, in that case, you're going to use it to influence your clinical treatment of the patient. And that is, that's very important. Would a hot shower after potential exposure act like a fever? No. The shower doesn't affect your core temperature. And if the virus is in cells, it's not going to really doing anything. Well, I know live attenuated vaccine. A few are in development, actually. But they have a ways to go. I think China is doing one, and at least some others. And as we spoke last week, Raul Landino in California at UCSF is doing one. So they're going to be a ways. I'm not sure they're going to make a difference in this pandemic. Why no attenuated? Because they take a lot longer to develop. And you have to have a BSL-3, a high containment facility to develop them in. Can I talk about the R value calculation? I cannot talk about how it's calculated without looking at some notes, but it's calculated typically. So the reproductive index, R0, is calculated early in an outbreak when it's just beginning and there's no interventions. And for SARS-CoV-2, it was calculated at 2 to 3. We can reduce the R0 or increase it. So if we reduce it below 1, the outbreak stops. Because the R0 is, on average, the number of people an infected person can infect, right? So if we reduce it to less than 1, we can stop an outbreak. Because then if one person infects less than one other person, then eventually it's going to fizzle out. You can also increase it by acting badly, by gathering in big groups, not wearing masks. You can increase the R0, and that's now the R0 went up in the UK. And coincidentally, this variant is found. And so some people believe that the variant is responsible for the increased R0, but I'm not sure about that. I don't know how to calculate it, though. But then you use the R0 to determine what percentage of the population has to be immune to prevent transmission. And if you assume that the R0 for SARS-CoV-2 is 2 to 3, then you need 50 to 70% of the population immune to prevent transmission, to protect people who are not immunized. Yeah, yes, Karate and Bloom have done good Twitter threads if you like Twitter. I like to talk about it in person. If you had to design a virus to bypass the current vaccines, well, that's pretty easy. You just change all the epitopes. We know where every epitope is in the spike. Just change them all. And if that is viable, then that would be it. If millions of virus particles can fit on the head of a pin, how does a loose-fitting cloth mask stop viruses, especially when my facial hair pokes through the mask. Well, I don't know why yours does. I wear a mask. I have a beard. My beard doesn't poke through it. But anyway, it's not the virus particles that the mask is stopping. It's stopping the droplets, the liquid droplets that are pretty big that you're exhaling and coughing out and so forth that contain viruses. They get hung up in the mask. All right. Didn't I answer this? Why will mRNA vaccines make people susceptible to cytokines? Oh, when they encounter a wild coronavirus. I don't see why not. If first of all, the vaccines may not even impact infection. So those wild coronas, first of all, they may not infect you because they're not adapted to humans. So I don't think that that's an issue. Yeah, don't mix vaccines. According to Dr. Offit, Paul Offit. Yep. If people get one dose of the 2-dose with the second delayed, won't there be a greater possibility of more mutations that might lead to resistance? Some people think this because your titers may wane, but they may not. So the titers after the first boost may not be as high as they should be. And the studies that were done previously support that. The second boost gives you a higher antibody titer. So the worry is that lower titers will allow viruses to reproduce. And when you have viruses reproducing in the presence of antibody, mutants can arise. But I don't think we really know the amount of antibody you need, and it may be sufficient. So I just think we have to look out for it. And we have to isolate viruses and sequence them and just say, is something going on here? People usually don't go to the hospital, until they get severe symptoms. They can't breathe typically, right? Second week, that's right. After so a week of incubation, a week of viral syndrome, and then if you're going to get serious disease and be hospitalized, it's the third week. Low CT at this stage. So typically these serious patients have the decline in virus titers, so the CT is rising. But yes, they can have more RNA than someone who has mild disease, implying a lack of early control. Yes. What's your opinion on accelerated blood clearance on vaccine based on lipid nanoparticles? I don't know what you mean. But the particles are put in your muscle, not in the blood, so I'm not too worried about them being cleared from the blood. If that's what you mean, I may not be interpreting your question. Here's a question you haven't heard yet. I get questions all the time that I haven't heard. It's great. I love it. Since the vaccine is mostly fat and salt, would it taste good? That depends if you like fat and salt. I guess humans do, right? But there's so little of it, right? There's 200 micrograms. I'm not sure you could taste it. But yeah, it might taste good. Do shift work schedules and circadian disruptions increase susceptibility to SARS-CoV-2? I would bet they do. I'm not sure anyone's looked, but certainly for other infections, circadian disruptions can make you more susceptible to infection. I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case for SARS-CoV-2. There's something unusual about the vaccine mRNA poly-A that is questionable. Oh, no, there's nothing unusual. It's a poly-A sequence, and inside there are a number of non-poly-A bases that were put in probably to increase translation stability and so forth. So I don't think it's questionable. Now, look, these people, Mindful Munchkin is saying their videos of Pfizer vaccine. Don't believe them. I look at the data from Pfizer, and there are no convulsions, and people have allergic reactions, yes, but it's quite rare. I would tell you. I would tell you if I saw this. There's no reason to hide it. You think we bicker? Yeah, sometimes we do. You should see us when no one's watching. It's fine. I don't mind. All right, let me try this one. If the parent has disease immunity and the children don't present symptoms, what's the threat to the parents for disease from their asymptomatic children? I think it's low if the parents have immunity. That's the whole point of having immunity. Whether it's from infection or a vaccine, they will be protected against serious disease. So I don't think that's an issue. The issue may be more the kids can get infected. And as we said before, kids get serious illness less frequently than older people, but they can get it. So, depends how worried you are about that. Do I think transverse myelitis will be a problem with Astrazeneca vaccine? I don't think so. I think that those cases were not vaccine related, and they have now put it in quite a few people in the UK. So I haven't heard anything about it. So I don't think it's an issue. Eight Thoughts is asking about recent data on IFR from Nature. I don't know. I'm sorry, I haven't looked at it, but I'll have a look if you want to come next week and we can talk about it. I don't know if it's the amount of gut bacteria, but it's the population and what metabolites they are making. They can definitely influence your immune system. So it's just not just numbers. Are there other viruses that use ACE2 for entry? Yeah, SARS-1. And if I'm not mistaken, one of the common cold coronaviruses. Let me look it up. I have a slide deck here of all my COVID slides. And I do have one. Okay, ACE2 is NL63, which is a common cold coronavirus. SARS-CoV and SARS-CoV-2. So 3 known ACE2 utilizing coronaviruses. See, that's why I make a slide deck of all my corona slides so I can immediately go to it. Isn't that great? Yeah, FDA says you need the second at 3 to 4 weeks, but that's because that's what they approved it for, and they can't vary from it. But I think, and the vaccination programs are going to be very strict about that. But it can be delayed somewhat. Yeah, I'm not sure there's supply for 2 doses if 65 plus are included. Yeah, we need to make more vaccine if we want to get everyone in the U.S., say by summer. That would be a nice goal. And again, if the second shot is delayed, won't that increase the likelihood? Maybe. You can't say for sure. It depends on what titer is needed to inhibit reproduction in a human, in the respiratory tract, right? Remember, we're measuring antibody levels in serum, and how that reflects what's going on in the tract isn't quite clear. So I'm not sure you can say if you have this titer, you're going to select for mutants. It's possible, and we need to look out for it. But you cannot conclude that it will. If an asymptomatic, Amy's favorite saying, this isn't rocket science. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. It is. If an asymptomatic infected person gets the vaccine, would that trigger a bigger immune system response? No, not necessarily. I always tell people that if you have had the disease, you should get the vaccine because we don't know your antibody titers or T cell levels for protection. So we want to make sure that we know the vaccine gives you a level which is protective for a period of time. So we want to vaccinate you. There's no, as I've asked Daniel Griffin this, there's no known risk of vaccinating a recovered patient. Do we understand how SARS-CoV-2 causes the inflammatory period of COVID well enough to work out a better treatment? No. So steroids are good for some patients, but not for all. They're anti-inflammatory, but it doesn't work in everyone. We tried anti-IL-6, the cytokine or IL-6 receptor. That didn't work so well. I have a feeling it's multiple components. One of the components is clearly what kind of sugar is on the IgG, because that can determine how well NK cells will use the antibody to attack cells and cause damage. So I think it's multifactorial, and we're going to, not just one monoclonal against IL-6 is going to fix it. But people are working on that, I hate to say that. I didn't volunteer for Pfizer, please. I don't work for any company. I'm not a fan of Pfizer, actually. I think they're too secretive, whereas I think Moderna has been more open, and they have been willing to collaborate with people. Will annual shots be needed if immunity only lasts a year? It's possible. Yeah. It's possible that you're going to need annual shots if immunity doesn't last, or if the virus changes. I used to say coronaviruses don't change antigenically. Now, I read Jesse Bloom's preprint, which is on the common cold coronaviruses, which clearly shows that they change antigenically in about 8 years. So it could be that SARS-CoV-2 will change, I don't know how often, 5 years, 8 years, but I think we should be prepared for that likelihood that we're going to have to keep vaccinating. What's the most likely company to roll out the newest? I think Johnson & Johnson is going to release their initial phase 3 results at the end of this month, and they may apply for EUA and get approved maybe in February. That's a possibility. If a person has a moderate reaction to the first, will the second make you sicker? Yeah, some people find they have more severe second shot reactions, yes. Which kind of makes sense because you're now kicking in the memory response, which is going to be more rapid and more intense than the primary response, but not everyone. So it's hard to predict. Why is it so difficult to isolate and purify? It is not. It's not. It was isolated in January of last year, immediately from some of the earliest patients, actually in December of 2019. And the only problem is you have to work with it in a BSL-3 facility, which is a certain level of protection, PPE and so forth, and it's hard to work with. So if you want to purify large quantities, it's a little difficult. But in China, they've done that, and they've made an inactivated vaccine, so it's not insurmountable, right? In learning that the vaccine prevents disease and not infection, so it may not prevent infection. We don't know. We simply don't know the answer. Once people get starting, will it be more dangerous for those who haven't gotten it without masks? Yeah, could be, because now these people will take their masks off. It won't be more dangerous, but if they decide to take off their masks where they were wearing one before, then that would make it more dangerous, right? Boy, we talked about beer a while ago. Gosh, the questions are so far behind. Don't worry, I'm not going to talk about beer. I don't know anything about it. All my coworkers have been coming up positive. I've been tested 6 months ago for antibodies, and again today, both negative. You could be lucky. You could have had 2 false negatives. Hard to say. Gorillas got the virus, in the San Diego Zoo. I don't know about horses. I haven't heard anything about that. No, the tonsil-less old folks are the most. I don't think so. You have other lymph nodes. The tonsils, in the back of your throat, but you have other cervical lymph nodes, so they'll take care of the immune response there. In Alberta, we have no influenza, but SARS-CoV-2 keep climbing. How is this possible? I don't have an answer for you, but it is weird because the low flu everywhere we think is because of the distancing. But clearly SARS-CoV-2 is still going around. I know we've looked at this question before. I really don't know. I don't have an answer for you. Kosovo, hello. In your opinion, and based on everything you've read, is COVID-19 vaccine immunity better than natural immunity, as in antibody levels, memory, longevity? I don't think we know the answer to that. We know somewhat what natural infection immunity is, and it's thought to be somewhat durable in years. But we have no idea about vaccine. But I think natural, so there are 2 ways you could look at this. Natural immunity could be more robust because, you have virus replication, all the proteins are being made, good immune response. On the other hand, the virus could antagonize the immune response. We know this virus encodes in some antagonists, and that could blunt the immune response. So it could go either way. I'm always in favor of attenuated vaccine viruses But as far as the wild-type virus go, I'm just not sure. Is it possible that different variants can recombine to create a pandemic within a pandemic? Well, it would still be the same pandemic. It would just be another variant. They could if they got into the same person. Some people think these variants arose by recombination already. And Nels Elde on Tweevo a few weeks ago suggested that. So yes, I think it's highly possible. Yeah, E484K might lower neutralization maybe tenfold, but it doesn't ablate it. And what does tenfold mean? What serum did you use to check it? You have to use serum of a lot of people because everyone's immune response is slightly different. No reports of horses with SARS-CoV-2. Can rheumatoid arthritis patients on immunosuppressive meds form a good response? That you got to ask Daniel Griffin. I thought I asked him that, and he said that they could be vaccinated. But if you're on meds for immunosuppression, then you have to talk to your doctor, and maybe they interrupt them for vaccination. I just don't know the answer to that. Are there any big differences between 2020 and 21? Well, I'm incorporating more information on SARS-CoV-2, right? As it's relevant. I mean, the course is about viruses in general. It's not about COVID-19 and SARS-CoV-2. But I do incorporate information as it's relevant because I understand this. We're in the middle of a pandemic and people want to know. So, you can check it out. Yep. Follow Jesse Bloom. Tell him we sent you. Is antibody-dependent enhancement a concern? I have not seen... There are animal models of coronaviruses where you can get ADE. It can happen in vaccination of animals, agricultural animals. There's no evidence in people that this is a concern. And I think so. ADE happens when you have a lot of non-neutralizing antibodies made that will bind virus but not neutralize it, and then the virus can get into cells when the cells grab onto the antibody end, right? And these vaccines that we're making are making a lot of neutralizing antibodies, so I don't think it's a concern. What's the difference between Novavax and J&J? So Novavax is a protein vaccine, and the J&J is an adenovirus vectored vaccine. What are theories around long-term safety concerns of mRNA vaccines? I don't see what the long-term safety concern would be. They're gone in 4 days. And a person who's injected, Pfizer and Moderna have done studies showing they go away in 4 days. So I don't know what the long-term effect would be. I think they're relatively mild as vaccine goes. Could a live attenuated adenovirus vector conceivably be used to achieve IgA mucosal immunity? Could that be a key to sterilizing immunity, such as what you get with Sabin? Well, so here's one idea that people were going to... I've read this months ago. We talked about this on Twitter. You take an adenovirus that replicates in the intestine, the human intestine, you put the spike gene in it, and then you put the virus in a capsule that makes it through the stomach and gets into the intestine. It dissolves there, and it delivers the adenovirus to the intestine. You then get replication there, an immune response, and when you immunize one mucosal surface, other mucosal surfaces also get those IgAs. So it could be, yes, that you could get IgA, strong IgA mucosal immunity. It might be sterilizing. It might drop transmission. It might drop shedding so much that you don't get transmission. So yeah, it's a good idea. It's okay. Live, doesn't worry. I know people would like to use live. I would say infectious attenuated, but I'm just fussy. Have I seen any papers on whether Hashimoto's disease is a risk factor? I have not. But that doesn't mean there won't be one. But so far I have not. Yeah, this flu universal vax phase failed. Yeah, it's unfortunate, but keep trying, right? Why would children be more exposed to coronas than adults? No, it doesn't make sense to me either. But they found that antibody levels in children are generally higher than in adults. Yeah, it doesn't make, because adults are continually getting infected every several years with these common cold coronas. So they should have good antibody responses. I don't know. And that's one of the reasons I didn't particularly like that paper, saying that these common cold corona antibody responses protect the kids against severe COVID. Why aren't they using nucleocapsid? I think it should be included, actually. But it was determined in, January. Here's the spike. It's needed for attachment. We're going to make antibodies to it, and they're going to block attachment. Simple, quick strategy. I always say I would love to be in the rooms where the companies decided this. What did they say? I think we should try spike. Okay, go. Is that it? They have some data? I don't know. What do I think of presumptive, possible, or suspect cases being lumped in? I don't like that. So I had back in September, I think it's a false positive, and I'm pretty sure it was a test. I had a PCR test, and the CT was 37. And I had it redone 3 days later, and it was negative. But my positive went to the New York State Department of Health as a positive, and it wasn't withdrawn afterwards. So I don't think that's a good idea. I think you need to figure it out if it's a real positive or not. Good luck, Patricia, with your vaccine. How do I keep up with the literature? I just have I have RSS feeds set up from different journals that I scroll through, and then Amy is amazing. She goes through the literature and she sends me papers. We have a shared Dropbox folder where she throws in SARS-CoV-2 papers. RNA-based therapeutics are coming of age. Yes, not just for vaccines, by the way, but to deliver therapeutic proteins. If you don't want it to be made constantly, you could have it mRNA and it's made for a few days, and that's it. Oxford vaccine may likely submit for EUA end of March. Thank you, Jaimito Frog. Thank you for the information. We were wondering about that. Wondering why you would cull millions of mink but hesitate to cull millions of bats. Well, the problem is it's more than millions of bats, right? We're not sure where to cull them. And they're not just in one place in China. They're all over Southeast Asia and other countries as well. So I'm not sure it would work. And if you take bats away, they're important mediators of the environment. They have ecological importance. They eat insects and the insectivorous bats. And if you got rid of the bats, that would be a problem with a lot of insects. So not just and there, as someone points out, they're wild bats and the minks were farmed. But I think you should do better biosecurity on mink farms and any other animals you're farming to make sure that they don't get infected, and vaccinate all the workers and vaccinate the animals eventually. How can PCR be accurate at a CT of 37? It's for diagnosis, it's not good. It's just for SARS-CoV-2, we know you're no longer infectious at a CT of 37, for sure. Yeah, they have lateral flow flu tests, antigen-based tests, for sure. What do I think about Professor Ioannidis from Stanford? So I don't like his work where he says science is not reproducible. He basically said all of science is not reproducible. And that's not true. You can find isolated examples of non-reproducibility in certain fields. But the reason we have two mRNA vaccines in less than a year is because science is reproducible. All the technology that led up to that is reproducible. So I don't understand where he's coming from. Maybe he just wants to be controversial. Some people do that. Amy just wants to get her work done. She's got a lot of work to do. She's running a lab basically by herself. So, and she has a technician now, but it's hard. But very smart person, and I'm privileged to work with her for many years. I'm going to go all the way to the bottom because I know that I'm not there. Let's see. Millions of bats. Lamont, is recombination possible? Alternative explanation of the highly... Yeah, yes. Nels LD thinks that recombination could explain the emergence of the highly mutated UK variant. And in fact, there are recombination analyses that you could do and figure it out. I'm sure somebody's working on it, for sure. These last comments are all about bats and minks. Yes, we are seeing more secondary bacterial infections and with COVID-19 and fungal. Yes, so Daniel Griffin sees the same thing. Bacterial with non-fermenters. Dr. Daniel Griffin can give an update. I think he talks about this quite a bit. Talked about it last time as well. I used to teach medical students a lot. I teach them less now. I give them a few lectures, and they're all online, basically, of course. But yeah, a bit, not a lot. All right, 4 more minutes, folks. 9:30, and I don't want to keep you forever. Do you use an anti-fog when masking? I don't, but I know a lot of people do. And people seem to like them, but I don't have an issue with it. What's an important target for SARS-CoV-2? Well, obviously the spike, right? Because vaccines are based on it and they seem to be working. What other proteins might be valuable? Nuclear protein, there are other membrane proteins. I think you'd have to sort it out. How do you feel we're doing on testing? Better, but not good enough. We need to have a cheap, rapid, daily test that would be every day you could take a test and see if you're infected or not, like a lateral flow. And we don't, and we should have. What do you think of half doses? So I think you need to give a full dose. If you want to delay the second dose, I don't have a problem with that. Some people, as we've seen in this discussion, think that it can give rise to antigenic variants, but if you delay the second dose, but as long as you give the second dose, I'm not saying don't give it, you can delay it so you can get more people the first dose. Would there be any advantage to having courses of multiple forms of the vaccine? Well, if they had, well, you'd have to test them, but if you had vaccines that gave different antigens, that might be valuable. We don't know. We've never tested them. What do we know about Sinopharm, the China vaccine that's inactivated? It's whole virus inactivated. They claim it has a very high efficacy, but I haven't seen the data, so I would like to see them. And I understand that they're coming out, so when they do, we can talk about it. The longer this pandemic goes on, what's the likelihood of a seriously dangerous variant emerging? This is a really good question. So I'm very interested in the evolution of viral transmission and virulence, and I have looked at many viruses, and we really don't have good data for it in any human infection. There's some data in animal infections. So many people being infected, and in this case, yeah, and everyone's different. So you can have variants arising randomly which have different properties. I'm not worried about a more virulent variant because I don't know what the selective advantage of that would be. I could see a less virulent variant, which makes 100% of people say mildly infected, and then it gets spread everywhere, right, even more rapidly. So it's an indirect effect on transmission. I think we need to watch it, though. The more people are infected, the more likely variants are going to randomly arise that are a problem. You like my glasses? Thank you. I do, too. If we're vaccinated, we still need to mask and social distance. Yeah, for sure. Are there any other viruses that jump between so many different species? Yeah, this is very interesting, isn't it? Because it went from bats to humans, and now we've given it back to many other animals. No, I don't think there is. I mean, Ebola viruses can go from bats to chimps and gorillas and humans and probably some other species. But, You know, the Ebola outbreaks are very small compared to this one. So this is remarkable because so many people are infected and so many people who are in contact. So this is a very broad host range. But again, they're all mammals of various sorts, but not every mammal is susceptible. So there's still restrictions. All my lectures will be on YouTube. Yeah, always. As long as I do lectures, they'll be on YouTube. So I started the course Monday, and those lectures will all be on. You bet. All right, folks, it's 9:30. Thanks for coming. I'm always amazed that you're here and you want to learn more. What could be better? So thanks for coming, and we'll see you a week from now. Amy will be back, and we'll take more of your questions. Good night.